I think it's safe to say that for many around the world, Ranma 1/2 was their first introduction to Rumiko Takahashi's work, or even anime and manga in general. When I was growing up in the early 2000s, the only way to access a lot of anime was through your second cousin's bootlegged VHS of Sailor Moon, or here in the West, the night channel Adult Swim, which would routinely play anime when no one else would. The early years of anime streaming was pretty much the reality that there was no official way of getting licensed anime in the West, and as a result, most of what people watched were bootlegged, heavily edited, censored, and altered shows by the time they came overseas. But despite all this, it didn't deter people's curiosity of what else was being made in the East. Quite the opposite, in fact. Take me, for instance. As a young kid, I had a ton more energy than what 20-something-year-old me does now, and so I used to get up around 5 a.m. and sit in front of my family's big plastic Sony TV set on a regular basis. I would watch the old Sonic cartoons, and frequently I would also watch the old 60s black and white Astro Boy series for hours, which would play through the distorted stock speakers of our cable television set. And it's impossible to replicate the feeling of anticipation I had getting up early to watch these cartoons, because it was like staring into a new world through the lens of a prolific storyteller, who wove together narratives in a way you had never seen before. It was exhilarating. It felt like you were the only one who had opened the secret gateway into a completely different world of entertainment, a feeling I think has largely disappeared in the modern oversaturation of anime content. And I think that's the same feeling a lot of others had when they first experienced anime in their respective countries back then. Now, while Urusei Yatsura historically stayed more or less under the radar of Western audiences due to Shogakukan's lack of marketing and distribution for it overseas in the last 30 years, this was not the case with Ranma 1/2. Ranma began publication in August of 1987, gaining popularity within a very short time among Japan's readers, and soon this notoriety would stretch beyond national borders. In 1993, a small company run out of California called Vits Communications began serializing Ranma 1/2 in the United States. Vits was the brainchild of Seiji Oribuchi, a man who had eagerly moved to America in the mid-70s, was largely influenced by hippie culture, and was one of the first to introduce manga and other Japanese media to a new audience in the States. Now, Oribuchi had met Matsuhiro Oga by chance in the 1980s, the managing director and future president of Shogakukan. They hit it off right away, and Oribuchi discussed his plan to bring manga overseas. With a healthy investment from Oga and Shogakukan publishers, Oribuchi founded Vits Communications in 1985. Fast forward to 1992, and the company was doing business steadily through its Japanese imports and had opened a book publishing department, but nothing had really taken off with readers yet. Now it's a no-brainer, but in 1992, the prospect of buying Japanese comics in bulk was a risk comic book sellers weren't really willing to take. No one knew if Americans would want to buy manga. In order for comic book stores to take this risk, Vits rebranded its Japanese manga as regular graphic novels in their designations, colorizing some of the works, and shifting the format from left to right to blend in with other American media. This was a very common practice in the 90s and early 2000s. If you've ever seen the old US covers for Nausicaa or watched the original Sailor Moon dub or Akira, you know how much of the original works were altered, censored, cut up, and misadvertised under the idea that foreign media wouldn't be acceptable to an American audience, but this Frankenstein of a localization would pass. And though I find the old Nausicaa posters weirdly funny and the original DIC dub of Sailor Moon is S tier in terms of comedy,
Oh wow, that looks hard!
I'm glad we can now experience the work the way it was originally intended, even if Major Bumsville is still the best dub line to be uttered to this very day.
Major Bumsville! Oh, I'm so late!
In 1993, Ranma got the same treatment when Vits eventually began serializing it in the US. Left-to-right formats, the coloring of the pages, the strange rebrandings, all of it in order to make sure it got off shelves and into the reader's hands. And you know what? Despite every change, it worked. Ranma 1/2 became a success overnight. The wonderful comedy and nature of Ranma's story resided with millions over in America, boosting Vits into the spotlight of premier Japanese imports. The relationship with Shogakukan continued as well with Rumiko's work beyond Ranma. And in modern day, Vits is one of the largest publishers of anime and manga in the US, and much of this is credited to this manga right here for turning things around at the start. Pretty cool. But what about outside of America and Japan? Well, this is where Ranma also flourished. In Europe, it was getting dubbed in every language you could think of: French, German, Italian, Spanish, and so many others. China was strengthening relations with Japan as well during this time, and Ranma gained a faithful audience with its cultural references and fun characters in the mainland. In fact, Ranma is considered among many to be the most popular Chinese character in anime, and that's considering his nationality is never explicitly disclosed in the series. In the Philippines, Ranma was also a massive hit, entertaining an entire generation. The original opening was swapped out with Pizzicato 5's Sweet Soul Review, which became an anthem to the show and is still fondly remembered among people today. Now, Ranma's inspired everything from Your Name to Turning Red, and countless anime and manga and cartoons and so many other things, particularly in the genres of harem, comedy, tsundere characters, romance, and gender swapping. But that's a conversation for another day. Right now, let's talk about a big part of Ranma's influence and its classic unanswered status among fandoms today: the anime adaptation. Starting in 1989, Studio Dean was responsible for the new anime adaptation of Ranma 1/2 with Kitty Films on as producers. Launched 2 years after the original publication, there was plenty of existing material to dig their teeth into, but things didn't initially go as smoothly as planned. The first episode of Ranma 1/2 appeared on April 15, 1989, with initially low ratings due to a Saturday time slot on Fuji TV, which put Ranma in direct contention with another popular anime at the time, Obo-chama-kun. With this and a Peachan kidnapping episode being delayed due to a sensitive incident occurring in Japan at the time, Ranma was taken off the air after only 18 episodes, reworked and re-implemented as Ranma 1/2 Netohen 1 month later. The time slot was moved back to Friday, and from there Ranma's ratings began to climb, reaffirming hopes that the series could be successful. And it was very successful. Now, similarly to the case with Urusei Yatsura, many of the fans of Ranma were introduced to the franchise through the anime as opposed to the manga, and it's undeniable that the animation had a huge effect on the IP's popularity worldwide. And so because of this, there are quite a few differences in the way the series is consumed and enjoyed. The anime didn't follow the manga exactly, suffice to say. Rather, for its releases, many of the episodes were reworked and reordered to fit certain arcs on one tape, with Vits doing this in order to keep continuity on their US releases. Many of the characters' antics were also amplified for comedic purposes, and a lot of characters in the manga were replaced, such as Gosenkugi being initially swapped with Sasuke in earlier episodes, or Linlin and Lunlun being derived from Pink and Link. And while the manga had its fair share of opponents that Ranma had to fight over larger arcs, such as Herb or Taro, these are scarcer than the anime fights, and many of the in-between stories focus on Ranma and Akane's growing relationship, or the various antics taking place around the Tendo family and Furunkin High School. These happen to be some of my favorite arcs in Ranma. In contrast, the anime adaptation allows for a different perspective. The animation allows for great fighting sequences. The voice acting really helped to enhance the character interactions and immerse you in the plot, and the music is awesome. It's hard to imagine the Ranma anime without its banger opening and ending sequences. In addition, Studio Dean's animation still holds up pretty well in my opinion. It's very crisp and clear that they really knew what they were doing. After all, they had just come off of completing the second half of the Urusei Yatsura anime, which has some of the most beautiful visual treatments given to anime that I've ever seen. When all is said and done, the anime adaptation of Ranma 1/2 feels a little bit dated, but that adds a level of charm, I think. In any case, there has been some speculation over the decades on why Ranma 1/2's anime counterpart ended so early and never concluded the manga's full story. Now, the manga originally ran from September 1987 to March 1996. The anime, on the other hand, began 2 years later, in 1989, and soon caught up with the source material. With episodes needing to be written past the point of the manga releases, Studio Dean began writing its own original content, and with it, a lot of filler. This is generally where you begin to see the more formula-driven side of the Ranma anime, and where the predictability of stories and characters become visible and the series seems to lose a bit of direction. By the time 1992 rolled around, people were still watching the show, but general audience engagement had dropped somewhat, which muddied ratings and watch time. There were 3 full-length movies produced as well, but I think the sentiment at this point was that with fluctuating viewership and the manga still catching up, it was time to let it go. So in September of 1992, Ranma ended with its own animated conclusion. There would be additional OVAs released adapting some of the later chapters after the fact, but in general, Ranma's anime concluded with the events of 1992. Now, it's a bit of a toss-up in my opinion on which is a better way to consume Ranma. I'm biased towards the manga, of course, because it completes the story and has a lot of quieter, more developed character moments, but let's be honest, it's also how I first consumed it. Those who read the manga first will probably prefer the manga, and those that watch the anime first will likely prefer the anime. So it's really just down to opinion, and I won't try to convince you that one is better than the other. That depends entirely on you. I can say that many of the anime episodes do tend to focus on the idea that Ranma must beat a new opponent by the end of this episode, and though many love the anime, others admit that they feel there are a lot of repeat filler arcs that don't progress the story much and leave the character development feeling rather stagnant and the reused jokes stale. But in all honesty, the manga has some of that stagnation as well, particularly in the later books. Akane has a period between volumes 32 and 36 where she completely gets reduced to a quote-unquote, "you're a pervert, Ranma, so I'm gonna beat you up" trope, without the nuance she previously had. Also, Ranma's not a pervert, I thought you knew that by now, Akane, oh my god. And I found that really hard to stomach to the point where I almost couldn't finish several of the volumes. Luckily, she bounces back to her old self later on, and that goddamn hammer finally goes away. But it almost feels like someone other than Takahashi was overseeing the manga during those volumes, or that Takahashi herself was just trying to insert filler to keep up with the schedule, which might explain why the writing went south and why the worst character in the entire series kept getting screen time. Seriously, she's just the worst. So neither is perfect, but I think if they combine anime original concepts with the source material, it would be fantastic. So if it ever were to get a reboot, Ranma could be seeing a completely different approach that might mesh pretty well with new fans. I found that Urusei Yatsura's recent reboot anime by David Production in 2022 is proof that you can still take an old property and do a wonderful job of bringing it to the modern day. And if Itaru is still an acceptable main character, then Ranma should do just fine as well. In any case, I've gotten a few comments in my last video which point out that my observation on Ranma's genders and sexuality are largely speculation. And I get that many people prefer not to hear some random guy on YouTube from the 21st century go on about Ranma's inherent idea of being true to yourself, especially when I'm way too young to be giving life advice. And to be fair, I feel I should preface that what these folks have said is true. In interviews about Ranma 1/2, Rumiko Takahashi has always affirmed that there is no internal dialogue about gender politics when it comes to Ranma. For her, the reason she made Ranma was simply because he was entertaining, and there were lots of opportunities for comedy from the sex changes. That's really it. At the end of the day, he is a guy that turns into a girl and wants to permanently become a male again, even at the end of the story. So no, there was never a canon intention or message, and that stands to this day. But over the years, I do think it's important to acknowledge why Ranma has become so popular, and a lot of that has stemmed from the ways in which people relate to the character of Ranma directly. No, there isn't an inherent meaning in Ranma's gender changes, but if someone finds certain gender undertones to be meaningful reasons to relate to Ranma's situation and love the story more, it's not anyone's job to tell them that they can't interpret the story that way and gatekeep it. To Rumiko Takahashi, Ranma 1/2 is just a fun action comedy, but seeing how the world adopted it and learned to love it for their own reasons was really fun to see. And I won't devalue their reasons for loving it just because it wasn't the original intention. It's amazing that a series that came out over 30 years ago still connects with fans today, and hearing how all of you talk about it so passionately is fantastic. So, in conclusion, this video is a celebration of Ranma, the people it influences, and the decades of fans it's entertained. This is how Ranma 1/2 brought anime to the world. Now, I'm hoping to do another video discussing Ranma in the future, but for now, thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, and let me know what you guys think of Ranma, anime and manga or otherwise. But as always, take care, and I'll see you all in the next video.